My Playful Wife, Episode 17, After the Show, written by Mia. The evening after the show had a different quality from any evening I can clearly remember, and I have been trying since to name the quality, and the nearest I can come is this. It felt like the air after rain, when the thing that has been building for hours has finally happened, and the world is left rinsed and quiet and slightly stunned by its own relief. The show went on for a long time after Saloni came out. These things do not end. They dissolve. The structured part, the pieces, the reveal, the turning of the room toward the woman who had made it, gave way to the unstructured part, the part that is really the point, where buyers find the maker and press find the angle, and the beautiful objects begin their slow conversion into the practical fact of a business that can go on existing. I stood at the edge of it and let it happen around me. I am good now at the edge of rooms. It is where I have done my best living this year. Kaveri found me before we left. She came out of the crowd with the specific expression of a woman who has made a successful bet and is permitting herself, briefly, to enjoy it. "Well," she said, "I told you." "You told me," I agreed. "Everything," she said. "Every piece. I have a waiting list now for things that don't exist yet. Do you understand what that is? That's the only real luxury. Not the thing, the wait for the thing." She looked across the room to where Saloni stood, hemmed in by people, holding her own. She doesn't know yet how good tonight was. She's too far inside it. You'll have to tell her later, when she comes back out to where the rest of us live. Tell her I said it was the best first collection I've shown in 20 years. Tell her I don't say that. "I'll tell her," I said. "And the rose one," Kaveri said. She paused, and something moved in her hard, precise face, something that was almost tenderness, and was certainly respect. "I'll tell you about the rose one when she's ready to hear it. Not tonight. Tonight she should just be tired and happy. Take her home." We walked home. The boutique was close enough to walk on a spring night, and neither of us had thought to arrange anything otherwise. The cars and the autos were for other people. On this night, people with somewhere to be. We had nowhere to be except the slow distance between the show and our bed, and we took it on foot, and I have been grateful since that we did, because some conversations can only happen while walking in the dark, side by side, not looking at each other. The walk made the conversation possible. The conversation could not have survived a table and 2 chairs and the obligation of a face. Saloni carried her shoes in her hand. She had taken them off somewhere between the bungalow gate and the lane, the way she does when an evening is finally hers again, and she walked the warm pavement barefoot with the shoes hooked on 2 fingers, and the show was still in her, visible, a charge under the skin. She was quiet in the particular way she gets quiet after large things, not withdrawn, not absent, but turned inward, processing, the work of metabolizing a big night happening somewhere behind her eyes. I didn't speak. I had learned the difference this year between the silence that wants company and the silence that wants to be left to do its work, and this was the second kind, and I let it work. At one point she reached over and took my arm. Not my hand, my arm, looping hers through it, drawing herself in against my side as we walked. It is a small thing to record, and it was not a small thing to receive, because she almost never does it. She is not, by reflex, a woman who hangs on a man's arm. It is the gesture of a person who wants to be physically connected to something solid while the inside of her is busy elsewhere, and she gave it to me, chose me to be the solid thing, and I adjusted my pace to hers and let her lean and said nothing and felt, walking, absurdly honored. We walked like that for a while. The city did its usual indifferent thing around us. The late traffic, the dogs, The shuttered shops and the ones still open, the smell of somebody's late dinner, the enormous ordinary life of the place going on with no idea that a woman had unveiled a year of her soul a few lanes back. "Kaveri sold everything," she said finally. "I know," I said. "She found me before we left. She wanted you told." I delivered the message the way it had been given to me, plainly. The best first collection she's shown in 20 years. She said to tell you, she doesn't say that. Saloni was quiet. Her hand tightened on my arm, fractionally. "The rose one went to 3 buyers," she said, after a block. "At the same time. 3 people wanted it, and there's only one of it, and Kaveri had to choose between them, which she said she hadn't had to do in years." A pause. She gave it to a woman from Ahmedabad, not the one who offered most. The one who, when she touched it, she cried. Kaveri said she watched her touch it and start to cry, and that was the end of the auction. She said you don't sell a thing like that to the highest bidder. You sell it to the one who weeps. I thought about the origin of that fabric. I let myself go all the way back to it, walking, with my wife's arm through mine. The lane in Lajpat Nagar almost a year and a half before. The 3 of us. Piyush still here, still ours. The trouble not yet arrived or arrived and not yet known. Pressed together in the crush of one of those impossible market lanes where the crowd moves you whether you choose to move or not. Saloni had stopped at a stall, the crowd pushing at our backs, and reached up for a bolt of silk in that rose so deep it was almost the color of something ending. And I remember, I had forgotten it for a year, and the walk gave it back to me. I remember that in the press of the crowd, reaching up with one hand for the silk, she had reached back with the other, blindly, and found my hand and held it. Not a romantic gesture, a practical one. Don't lose me in this crowd. The unconscious reach of a wife for a husband in a press of strangers. But she had reached for me. In the exact moment she first touched the fabric that would become the center of her life's first real work, her other hand had been holding mine. I had not understood at the time that anything was being woven. You never do. You are only ever at the time in a crowd, holding a hand, looking at a color. That's right, I said. That's who should have it. The one who weeps. She nodded against my shoulder. We walked another block in the dark. I keep thinking about what Kaveri said, she said. About the woman who cried. She said the dress already knew what it was for. That she was just the one who carried it to its person. What do you mean? That things have their right destination, Saloni said slowly, working it out in the open air, the way she works a problem out loud when she trusts the person beside her to let her be unfinished. That the fabric knew, the whole time, that it was for a woman in Ahmedabad who would weep when she touched it. That everything before, the lane, the buying, the cutting, the year, was just the fabric traveling toward the person it was always going to belong to. She paused. I think that's true. Not just of the dress. I think it's true of everything. Everything, I said. She stopped walking. She turned and looked at me, full on, the whole gaze, the one she gives only to things she means all the way down, the streetlight catching one side of her face and leaving the other in the warm dark. Everything, she said. And I understood what she was telling me, under the cover of talking about a dress. She was telling me about the year, about all of it, the kitchen, the wound, the framework, the long, slow remaking of 2 people into the people who could walk home like this. She was telling me that she had come to believe it had a destination too, that we had been traveling the whole terrible, beautiful time toward this, toward a barefoot walk on a spring night with her arm through mine, and that the traveling, however it had felt while we were inside it, had been the fabric finding its person. That nothing had been wasted. That even the grief had been weaving. I did not say any of this. You do not say a thing like that out loud. You would crush it. I just held her gaze for a moment in the streetlight and let her see that I had received the whole of it, the dress and the not dress both. We started walking again. "Are you happy?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm something better than happy. I don't have a word for it." I smiled in the dark. She heard it somehow. You can hear a smile if you're close enough and quiet enough. "You said something like that once," she said, "months ago, about being okay. You said you were something better than okay, and you didn't have a word for it." "I meant it then too," I said. "I know." She leaned her head briefly against my shoulder as we walked, a moving version of the thing we did, still, on the balcony at night. "We're the same, you and I. We keep finding the better thing, and not having the word for it. Two people walking around with a whole vocabulary of missing words." I thought about the kitchen, the bathroom window, the grill, the plastic stool in the dark. The framework I had built when no one would give me instructions. The whole long year of not having the words, of building a life out of feelings I couldn't name with a language that hadn't been invented for the situation I was in. "Maybe that's good," I said. "Maybe the things that don't have words, yet are the only interesting ones. The minute a thing has a word, everyone thinks they understand it. They stop looking at it. Maybe we're lucky. Maybe not having the word is what keeps us looking." She laughed, a short, surprised exhale in the dark. "Dangerous," she said. "I keep telling you, you've become dangerous. A year ago you couldn't have said that, and now you say things like that on the street with your shoes off." "My shoes are on," I pointed out. "You're the one with no shoes." "Details," she said. We turned the corner onto our street. The building stood at the far end of it, ordinary and ours, and you could see our balcony from here if you knew where to look. I knew where to look. The dark rectangle of it 3 floors up, the railing where we string the lights at Diwali, where we sit at night, where she leans her head on my shoulder, and the city spreads out below us. It is not a beautiful building. It is the most beautiful building I know. "Hungry," she said. "Starving," I said. I was. We had both forgotten to eat. You forget on the nights that matter. "I'll make something," she said. She unhooked her arm from mine to find the keys in her bag, and the small loss of her weight against my side was its own small thing. Nothing complicated. Kitschty. The 2 a.m. kind. "Yes," I said. "Come home," she said, though we were home. We're standing at the gate of home, and I understood that she did not mean the building. She meant the other thing, the portable thing, the one we carried around with us and made wherever we both were. Come home. As though home were a place you arrived at together, again, each night, by choosing to. We went up. She made the kitschty, the simple 2 a.m. kind, standing at the stove still in the clothes she'd worn to her own triumph, and we ate it at the kitchen table at midnight with the window open and the spring night coming in, and she told me, slowly, between mouthfuls, the parts of the evening I hadn't seen, what the buyer from Bombay had said, what Kaveri had whispered, the moment just before she went out when she'd been sure, absolutely sure, that the whole thing was a catastrophe and she should call it off. I listened to all of it. I asked the real questions. I did not stop looking at her. Not once. Not for the whole telling. And somewhere in Delhi, a woman from Ahmedabad was, I suppose, lying awake thinking about a rose-dark thing she would carry home in the morning. The dress arrived, finally, at its person. When the khichdi was gone, we took the last of the chai out to the balcony, because the balcony is where we take the things that are too big for the kitchen. The spring night was warm and the colony was asleep, and the city beyond it kept up its low electric hum. She sat with her feet on the lower bar of the railing, her year's work behind her, and for a while neither of us said anything, which between us is its own kind of speech. Her phone had been buzzing all evening, and she had been ignoring it, the way you ignore the world on the night that belongs to you. Now she looked. She had sent a photograph earlier. It turned out, the rose-dark piece, snapped in a stolen second at the show, fired off to Bengaluru, and Bengaluru had erupted. There was a stack of messages from Meera, escalating into capitals and exclamation marks, the composed engineer entirely abandoned. There was one from Piyush. She called him. She put it on speaker, there in the dark, because that is what we do now, the small deliberate statement of it. You are part of this. And my brother's voice came up out of the phone into the Delhi night, 300 kilometers away and entirely present. Bobby, it's extraordinary. Meera hasn't stopped. She's showing everyone. She's telling actual strangers in the lift. Saloni laughed, the tired full one, and Meera's voice broke in behind his, and for a few minutes the four of us were on a balcony together, 2 in the body and 2 in the phone. The way we are a family now, distributed across a country, and assembled by whatever signal will carry us. You did it, Bobby, Piyush said before he hung up. You actually did it. I did it, she said, trying the sentence on again, the way she'd tried it at 4 in the morning 3 nights before. It still didn't quite fit in her mouth. I thought it might take her weeks to believe it, and that I would be there for the believing, the way I had been there for the making. When the call ended, she set the phone face down on the railing and looked at me. They love me, she said, not vain, astonished. Your brother and that girl. After everything, they just love me. Yes, I said. They do. We all do. It turns out to be the simplest thing about any of it. She put her head on my shoulder. Tomorrow there'll be the orders, she said, drowsy now. Kaveri said there's a list. People waiting for things that don't exist yet. I'll have to begin again from nothing. She did not sound daunted. She sounded like a woman describing the shape of a happiness she had finally decided to trust. Not tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow you sleep. The list will keep. The list is the good kind of problem. The good kind of problem, she repeated, and I felt her smile against my collarbone and thought that we had somehow become people who had good kinds of problems, which is the only sort of luck that lasts. We stayed out until the chai was gone and past it, until the cold finally crept up out of the floor the way it does even on warm nights if you sit long enough, and still neither of us moved to go in. I had spent the early part of the year half expecting a bill, certain that happiness, in our particular arrangement, came with an invoice that would arrive eventually, addressed to me. I had stopped believing in the bill. There was no bill. There was only this. A woman who had made something true, and the people who loved her for it, and a warm, dark balcony, and the long, ordinary future of getting to keep paying attention. Later I wrote one line. She walked home barefoot with her year's work behind her and put her arm through mine. The dress found its weeper. She thinks everything finds its person, even us, even the bad parts, that it was all the fabric traveling. I think she might be right. Khichdi at midnight. She said, come home, standing at home. I knew what she meant. To be continued in episode 18, The Summer.
Simbolo di copyright Mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 17 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
Ay, Mia.
Thank you for listening.